Hello, myself Sunil Ramakrishna. Here basically we are discussing about one topic that is related to Microsoft blood cells. And in this basically we are discussing about first the Microsoft told that basically that we can give basically up to 3150 age basically. Means one person can get this many birth basically. That basically the Microsoft groups basically want to say basically, right? That he has already told. For that basically see the expense basically this is done. This if Microsoft basically is telling that basically he can give this many birth, so normal person can afford this. That's not possible, no, basically. Normal person basically can't afford. See the expense also, just see basically 90,000 crore basically. So if basically Microsoft is going to give, for example, one person died, he is going to give second birth basically of that same body. So he is going to charge some amount basically. So that will be in crores of rupees basically. More than basically that basically. Crores of rupees basically. So normal person basically can't afford basically. For that basically only rich people basically can afford this basically. Normal people, like for example I basically died as him basically. So I can afford basically second birth. Though that is not possible. Why? Because I am not up to that rich level basically person. So that basically according to that disease comes, medicine comes, then basically the death comes of the first birth basically. Then basically the second birth. Like this basically 3150 birth basically. 100 planets basically created, this many created, this created. There also basically medicines are there, disease are basically there. So you can just imagine basically the expense is too much basically. So if particular person basically is having 3000 basically birth, so what, how much basically the rich that particular person will be? And if basically this person basically is having this many birth basically, so how basically the birth of that company basically the Microsoft owner basically might be, that is Microsoft group basically, they might be testing this everything basically with some group basically. Few people says that basically, few people says basically, whether it is correct or not, no, I don't know basically. This basically data basically they test basically and then basically dumps into the body parts basically. That basically they test into the Microsoft group basically. Few data basically are tested by the Microsoft company or Microsoft company employees, and few data basically are tested in the Microsoft clients basically. So that basically that type of test basically they do basically, because they are basically authorized group basically. So they basically do they 100% do basically, that is 100% sure basically. Without test basically they can't dump this data. So that basically is very dangerous basically. Few people says that, do you know basically Sunil, for example you are working in one of the software company, so they keeps on doing the experiment basically with your body parts basically. For example you are working in TCS basically, just assume basically in really basically I am not working, assume that basically I am working in TCS, I am working basically. So assume that basically Sunil R. Nair basically is working in TCS basically, and today date is 23rd December 2023, around 6 o'clock, 6:40, around 7 o'clock basically going to be. Assume that basically I am working in TCS basically. So they basically do the experiment of their employees basically, because they are paying up to that level basically. Per employee basically they, do you know how much they expense basically do the expense? More than 1 crore rupees. Per employee basically they do the expense of more than 1 crore rupees. So if they are doing the expense basically this much basically, right? So at least they should get the return also. Some return actually they should get basically. So they literally do the experiment basically, that is 100% sure basically. In that experiment basically, that is the software basically which they creates, that basically their energy basically they dumps into the employees body basically. One example I have already taken, the CRM project basically, how basically the CRM project discussion basically was ongoing, and in this basically we have discussed that basically the CRM project was discussed by the set of groups basically, and that was the first CRM project basically which was launched in the world basically. So that experiment basically, that was experiment basically, that was actually but that the employee don't know basically that they have done lots of things basically for that project basically. So if they are doing the spend of 1 crore rupees per employee basically in India basically, so they 100% will be they will be doing some experiment. 100% they will do doing experiment. 1 crore expense means they are dumping energy, each and everything basically, food expense, then the computer expense, then the mediclaim, each and everything basically they are there, no, basically. And then basically the traveling like this, each and everything basically are there. Then security expense basically of the people, each and every employee basically. So it comes to around 1 crore basically, 1 crore minimum I am telling. If they are basically into management level, senior delivery heads or director basically, that comes to more than basically 1 crore basically. So you can just imagine basically the big level company basically, they do the experiment, and they do the experiment, that is 100% sure, and they basically after doing the experiment with their employees only basically they launch the product basically. So like this basically TCS, many companies basically are there, like Accenture is there, Capgemini's are basically there, they do the experiment basically, and that's basically they are spending 1 crore rupees. Then basically you can just imagine, basically if they are spending 1 crore, then they should get 1 crore rupees at least basically. So that's basically the experiment. And in this basically one example I have already told, if they are creating one software basically, and if they are generating the software into human needs, then you can just imagine the income also, no, basically that comes to 80,000 crore basically, 90,000 crore basically. So that 80,000 basically crore just in 1 month only basically, they whatever employee basically they do, whatever expense of the employee basically they do, that basically just covers in the one or two products only basically. So you can just imagine basically. So that's basically the investment basically, you can say employee basically are basically the investment basically, and the investment basically return comes basically, but that basically comes few basically in company basically say that basically return comes early basically, few say that basically returns comes little bit late basically. So here basically we were discussing this basically, and in last video basically we saw that basically nowadays basically software company basically can't sit for 2 to 3 hours also basically. That point basically we have already discussed basically. A little bit basically might be that the environment basically keeps on changing. According to that basically the idea has to be refreshed basically, or basically if you basically can't refresh the idea basically, that is basically each and every employees basically get connected with the set of idea. One person told that basically, do you know Sunil basically why the people basically can't sit in the office basically? Then one of the person told that one person basically body basically contains how many ideas basically. If you can track that ideas basically, then basically there is no disease basically in this world basically will come basically. But that basically that will affect the doctor's income basically. If this idea will get implemented, that will 100% affect the doctor's income basically. So that's very dangerous idea basically. But that basically rich people basically do that basically, because it's lots of expense basically are also basically there. Lots of expense basically are there to refresh each and every ideas basically inside the body. In next video basically we are going to see that each and every ideas basically how that is getting refreshed basically.